My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this story may touch a place in your heart you thought had been silent forever. Stay until the very end, because what you're about to hear isn't about coincidence, it is about the extraordinary courage it takes to speak the truth when fear has ruled for far too long. Imagine a moment when someone decides they can no longer hide behind pride, silence, or regret. Imagine a moment when a heart finally becomes louder than fear. That is where our story begins. There are moments in life that divide our journey into two parts, the person we were before and the person we become afterward. This story begins on one of those unforgettable days. The town square was alive with laughter, conversations, and ordinary people going about their lives. No one expected that within a few minutes, everything would change. Among the crowd stood someone carrying a secret they had hidden for what felt like forever. Every smile they wore concealed sleepless nights. Every polite conversation hid a heart that had been longing to speak one simple truth. They had spent months convincing themselves that silence was safer than honesty. But silence had become heavier than any rejection they could imagine. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. Earlier that morning, they had looked into the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. They saw tired eyes, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying emotions that had never been given a voice. They whispered quietly, "If I stay silent one more day, I may spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been." Those words echoed through their heart like thunder. For the first time, fear no longer sounded wise. It sounded like a prison. And they knew they could not remain inside it any longer. As the afternoon sun filled the streets with golden light, they walked toward the place where so many memories had begun. Their hands trembled. Their heartbeat refused to slow. Every step forward felt like a battle between turning back and continuing on. People greeted them with smiles, unaware that they were witnessing someone walking toward the most important decision of their life. Every memory, every conversation, every shared laugh, and every goodbye returned to their mind all at once. Those memories didn't pull them backward anymore, they pushed them toward honesty. Don't skip this next part, because it holds the heart of the story. They reached the center of the gathering and stopped. For a long moment, they simply stood there, taking slow breaths while the crowd continued moving around them. Their closest friends noticed something unusual. The confidence they usually carried had been replaced by visible emotion. Someone gently asked, "Are you all right?" Instead of answering immediately, tears filled their eyes. The silence that followed became louder than every voice in the crowd. Then came the moment no one expected. With a trembling voice that gradually grew stronger, they admitted something they had hidden for far too long. They said they were tired of pretending they didn't care. Tired of acting as though memories no longer mattered. Tired of allowing fear to make every important decision. They confessed that they had spent countless nights wishing they had spoken sooner. They admitted they still treasured every act of kindness, every meaningful conversation, and every moment that had changed their life. It wasn't a speech meant to impress anyone. It was simply the truth, spoken without disguise. Listen carefully, because what happened next changed the atmosphere completely. The crowd became silent. Some people looked surprised. Others quietly smiled, recognizing how much courage it takes to be vulnerable in front of others. Their closest friends stepped closer, not to interrupt, but to stand beside someone who had finally chosen authenticity over appearance. In that moment, they realized something remarkable. Speaking honestly did not make them weaker. It made them freer. For years they believed love meant never showing weakness. That afternoon they discovered the opposite. Real love requires honesty. Real courage means allowing your heart to be seen, even when you cannot predict the outcome. The fear that had controlled them for so long began losing its power with every truthful word they spoke. Every sentence felt like another chain falling away. Every tear carried away another layer of regret. Stay until the very end, because the most unforgettable moment was still waiting. After the silence settled, an elderly person who had quietly watched everything from a nearby bench stood and said something the entire crowd would remember for years. The bravest people are not those who never feel afraid. They are the ones who choose truth even while they are afraid. Those simple words brought tears to more than one person's eyes. Suddenly, what had seemed like one person's confession became a reminder for everyone listening. Every heart deserves the chance to speak honestly. As the sun slowly began to set, the crowd gradually returned to their daily lives, but something had changed inside every person who had witnessed the moment. They had seen that vulnerability can inspire courage in others. They had seen that sincerity has the power to soften even the hardest hearts. Most importantly, they had seen someone stop living according to fear and begin living according to truth. My beloved child, if this story speaks to your heart, let it remind you of something important. Every person carries feelings they sometimes struggle to express. Every relationship grows stronger through honesty, patience, respect, and understanding. Sometimes the greatest turning point is not a dramatic miracle, it is the quiet decision to stop hiding behind fear. Whether life brings reconciliation, a fresh beginning, or simply deeper peace, choosing truth over silence is never wasted. And as the evening sky filled with stars, the person who had once believed they would always be trapped by regret walked home carrying something far greater than certainty. They carried peace. For the first time in many years, their heart was no longer asking, "What if?" It was quietly saying, "Whatever tomorrow brings, I faced today with honesty." And that became the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of their life. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because the story was only beginning. Stay until the very end, because after that unforgettable confession, something happened that no one in the crowd expected. It wasn't the loud applause or the surprised expressions that changed everything. It was the silence that followed. Sometimes silence speaks louder than 1,000 voices. Sometimes, in the quiet that comes after a courageous moment, hearts finally begin to understand what words alone could never explain. As the crowd slowly drifted away, they remained standing exactly where they had spoken their truth. Their heart was still racing, their hands were still trembling, and tears still rested in their eyes. Yet something felt different. The burden they had carried for so many years had disappeared. Whether life rewarded their honesty or not no longer mattered as much as it once had. They had finally become free from the prison of pretending. For the first time in years, they could breathe without the weight of regret pressing against their heart. Listen carefully, because this changes everything." Among the people leaving the square, an elderly woman quietly approached them with gentle eyes and a warm smile. She had witnessed every word, every tear, and every moment of courage. Without saying much, she simply placed her hand over theirs and softly whispered, "Never regret speaking from a sincere heart. Honest words spoken with kindness are never wasted." Those few sentences settled deeply within them. They realized that courage has a way of encouraging courage in others, even strangers. That evening, they walked home beneath a sky painted with soft shades of orange and purple. Every step felt lighter than the one before. The streets were the same. The houses were the same. Yet the world somehow looked different because their heart had changed. They no longer saw themselves as someone defined by fear or missed opportunities. They saw someone who had finally chosen authenticity over appearances. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but uncertainty no longer frightened them. It reminded them that every tomorrow carries the possibility of a new beginning. Don't skip this next part, because it carries the deepest emotion yet. When they arrived home, they quietly sat beside the window where so many sleepless nights had been spent wondering, what if? Tonight, however, they asked a different question. What kind of person do I want to become from this day forward? That single question became more important than every unanswered question about the past. They understood that true growth begins when we stop chasing yesterday and begin building tomorrow with wisdom, kindness, and hope. As the rain gently touched the window, they opened their journal once more. This time, they didn't write about heartbreak. They wrote about gratitude. They thanked life for teaching them patience. They thanked difficult seasons for revealing hidden strength. They thanked every challenge that had transformed fear into compassion. By the final page, they realized something beautiful. The hardest chapters had become the very chapters that taught them how to love more deeply, forgive more freely, and appreciate every ordinary moment. Stay until the very end, because what happened next became the most touching part of the story. The following morning, while walking through a quiet park, they noticed a father teaching his young daughter how to ride a bicycle. She fell again and again, yet each time the father gently helped her stand back up. He never scolded her for falling. He simply smiled and encouraged her to try once more. Watching that simple moment brought tears to their eyes. They suddenly understood that life often teaches us in the same gentle way. Falling does not mean failure. It is simply part of learning how to move forward with greater courage. Listen carefully, because this realization transformed their heart forever. They stopped seeing their past as a collection of mistakes. Instead, they began seeing it as a series of lessons that had quietly prepared them for a brighter future. Every disappointment had taught resilience. Every goodbye had taught gratitude. Every lonely night had taught compassion for others who also carry invisible struggles. Nothing had been meaningless. Every chapter had shaped them into someone capable of offering genuine kindness to the world around them. Days turned into weeks, and people around them began noticing a quiet light within them that had never been there before. They smiled more sincerely. They listened more patiently. They spoke more gently. They no longer needed to prove their worth because they had finally learned that every person carries value simply by choosing love, integrity, and compassion. Their peace no longer depended on perfect circumstances. It grew from the daily choice to forgive, to hope, and to live honestly. My beloved child, don't skip this final thought, because it is the heart of the entire story. Sometimes the greatest victory is not winning someone's approval. It is becoming the person you were always meant to be. A person whose heart remains soft after hardship. A person whose kindness survives disappointment. A person whose hope continues shining even after the darkest nights. As they looked toward another beautiful sunrise, they whispered with quiet confidence, "Whatever tomorrow brings, I will meet it with gratitude instead of fear, truth instead of silence, and love instead of regret." And as those words filled the morning air, they walked forward knowing that the strongest hearts are not the ones that never break, they are the ones that choose to love, to forgive, and to hope again, every single day. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this chapter begins where hope quietly meets reality. Stay until the very end, because the greatest moments in life are often not the loudest ones. They are the quiet moments when a person realizes they are no longer living for yesterday's pain but for tomorrow's purpose. The confession in the town square had become a memory, yet its impact continued to ripple through countless hearts. Days had passed, but the courage shown that afternoon was still being talked about. Some remembered the tears. Others remembered the honesty. But the person who had spoken remembered only one thing, that for the first time in years, they had been completely true to themselves. As the morning sunlight poured through the window, they woke with an unfamiliar feeling. It wasn't excitement, and it wasn't fear. It was peace. They looked at the ceiling for a long moment and smiled softly. They realized they had slept through the night without replaying old conversations in their mind. There were no endless questions keeping them awake, no imaginary arguments, no regrets demanding attention. Their heart had finally discovered the quiet comfort that comes when we stop hiding from our own truth. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. While making breakfast, they noticed how beautiful ordinary life had become. The warmth of sunlight on the kitchen floor, the sound of birds outside the window, the aroma of fresh coffee, and the gentle rhythm of a new day reminded them that happiness is often hidden inside simple moments. They had spent so much time waiting for one extraordinary event that they had forgotten to notice the extraordinary beauty of everyday life. Now every small blessing felt like a gift they had overlooked for far too long. That afternoon, they decided to visit the local community center where volunteers gathered to help families in need. They had never considered themselves someone capable of encouraging others, yet something inside gently pushed them to go. They spent hours serving meals, listening to stories, and offering kind words to strangers. One elderly gentleman smiled warmly and said, "Sometimes the people who have known the deepest pain become the ones who offer the greatest comfort." Those words stayed in their heart long after they returned home. They realized their journey had prepared them not only to heal themselves but also to bring hope to others. Don't skip this next part, because it carries the deepest lesson of the story. That evening they found themselves standing once again in the same town square where everything had changed. This time there was no crowd, no speech, and no overwhelming emotion. Only quiet gratitude filled the air. They looked around and smiled, remembering how frightened they had been that day. Then they whispered softly, "Thank you for giving me the courage to tell the truth, even when my voice trembled. In that peaceful silence, they understood that courage leaves behind something beautiful, it leaves behind freedom. As weeks turned into months, they slowly rebuilt the life they had once believed was impossible to recover. They reconnected with old friends, discovered new hobbies, laughed more often, and found joy in helping people around them. They no longer introduced themselves through the lens of heartbreak. Instead, they became known for their patience, kindness, and genuine compassion. Their past no longer defined them. Their character did. Listen carefully, because what happened next surprised even them. One afternoon, while sitting beneath a large oak tree with a notebook in their hands, a young stranger approached and quietly said, "I heard about your story. Your courage inspired me to have an honest conversation with someone I had been avoiding for years. Thank you." Tears filled their eyes once again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. They realized that one act of honesty can encourage countless others to choose truth over fear. The ripple of courage continues long after the moment itself has passed. Stay until the very end, because this is where the story finds its deepest meaning. They no longer waited for life to become perfect before allowing themselves to be happy. They laughed freely, loved generously, forgave sincerely, and treated each new day as another opportunity to become a blessing to someone else. They had discovered that joy does not come from controlling every outcome. Joy comes from living each day with integrity, gratitude, and an open heart. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, they opened the final page of their journal and wrote, "I once believed my story ended with heartbreak. I now understand it truly began the moment I chose honesty over fear. My greatest victory was never changing the past. My greatest victory was allowing the past to change me into someone kinder, stronger, and more compassionate." They closed the journal gently, looked toward the evening sky, and smiled with complete peace. My beloved child, if you have stayed until this moment, carry this message with you wherever life leads. Every heart will face seasons of waiting. Every soul will experience moments of weakness. But those moments are not the end of your story. They are invitations to grow in wisdom, patience, and love. Never be afraid to choose honesty. Never be ashamed of kindness. Never believe that hope is wasted. The strongest people are not those who never cry, they are those who continue to love with courage after every tear has fallen. And as the first stars appeared above them, they quietly walked into the future, not searching for a perfect ending, but living each new chapter with a peaceful heart, knowing that the greatest love story is the one that transforms us into the best version of ourselves. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this chapter begins after the applause has faded, after the tears have dried, and after the world has returned to its ordinary rhythm. Stay until the very end, because the most meaningful chapters are often written when no one else is watching. The crowd had long since forgotten that remarkable afternoon, but the lessons it left behind continued to live quietly inside every heart that had witnessed it. And for the one who had finally spoken honestly, each new sunrise felt less like another day to survive and more like another chance to become the person they had always hoped to be. One crisp morning, they took a long walk through the same streets where they had once carried the unbearable weight of silence. The buildings had not changed. The trees still swayed gently in the breeze. The familiar cafe still welcomed its morning visitors with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee. Yet everything looked different through eyes that were no longer clouded by regret. They realized that the world itself had not transformed, they had. Their heart had become lighter because they had finally released the burden of pretending to be someone they were not. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. As they crossed the old stone bridge overlooking a quiet river, they paused and watched the flowing water. The river never tried to return to where it had been yesterday. It simply continued moving forward, carrying every drop toward a new destination. Standing there, they whispered softly, "Maybe healing is like this. It doesn't erase yesterday. It gently carries us beyond it." Those simple words brought an unexpected smile. For the first time, they understood that moving forward did not mean forgetting. It meant trusting that every experience had prepared them for something beautiful still waiting ahead. That afternoon, they received a handwritten letter from one of the friends who had stood beside them on the day of their heartfelt confession. The letter contained only a few sentences, yet every word carried tremendous warmth. "You reminded us that courage isn't loud. It's choosing honesty when fear tells you to stay silent. Because of you, I finally apologized to someone I had hurt years ago. Thank you for showing me that vulnerability can heal more than pride ever could." As they finished reading, tears quietly rolled down their face, not tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude. They never imagined their own journey could become a source of hope for someone else. Don't skip this next part, because it carries the deepest truth of all. That evening, they visited the hill overlooking the town where they often went to think. The sun slowly disappeared beneath the horizon, painting the sky with colors too beautiful to describe. Sitting there in peaceful silence, they realized something extraordinary. Every difficult chapter had prepared them to appreciate moments like this. If life had never challenged them, they might never have noticed how precious simple peace truly is. They closed their eyes and quietly thanked every season that had shaped them, even the painful ones. As the stars began appearing one by one, they remembered the countless nights they had spent asking, "Why is this happening?" Now the question had changed completely. They asked, "How can I use everything I've learned to make someone else's journey a little lighter?" That single change in perspective filled them with purpose they had never experienced before. Their pain had become compassion. Their waiting had become patience. Their healing had become encouragement for others who still believed they were alone. Stay until the very end, because the story is reaching its most meaningful moment. The following weekend, they volunteered to speak at a small gathering focused on hope and personal growth. They didn't speak as someone who had all the answers. They spoke as someone who had walked through uncertainty and discovered that honesty is stronger than fear. Their voice trembled at first, but soon confidence replaced anxiety. They shared how pretending to be strong had nearly broken them, and how opening their heart had become the beginning of true healing. When they finished, the room remained silent for several seconds before gentle applause filled the air. Not because they had delivered a perfect speech, but because they had spoken from a genuine heart. After the event, a young person quietly approached with tears in their eyes and said, "I thought I was the only one carrying this kind of pain. Hearing your story reminded me that I'm not alone." Those words became one of the greatest gifts they had ever received. They realized that our deepest wounds, when healed with grace and compassion, can become bridges that help others find hope. Sometimes the greatest purpose of our struggles is not what they teach us, but how they enable us to comfort someone else. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this message is for every heart reading these words. Life will always bring seasons that test your courage. There will be moments when fear whispers that silence is safer than truth. There will be days when yesterday feels heavier than tomorrow. But never underestimate the quiet power of one honest step forward. Healing rarely arrives all at once. It grows through every act of forgiveness, every choice to remain kind, every decision to hope again after disappointment. As they stood beneath the night sky one last time, they smiled with a heart completely at peace. They no longer measured success by applause, recognition, or perfect endings. They measured it by the number of lives they could brighten with kindness, by the courage they chose each day, and by the gratitude they carried into every sunrise. Looking toward the stars, they whispered gently, "Thank you for every chapter that taught me to love more deeply, forgive more freely, and live more honestly." And as a cool breeze passed through the quiet night, they walked home with a heart no longer searching for what had been lost, but joyfully embracing everything that was still waiting to be discovered. In that quiet walk, they realized the greatest miracle was never finding a perfect ending. It was becoming the kind of person who could bring hope wherever they went, and that beautiful journey was only just beginning. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this is the final chapter of a journey that began with fear but ends with hope. Stay until the very end, because every tear, every sleepless night, every unanswered question, and every moment of courage has been leading to this one unforgettable lesson. If you have walked through every chapter of this story, then you already know it was never simply about one confession. It was about discovering that the strongest hearts are not the ones that never break, they are the ones that choose to love again after being broken. Months passed quietly, and life continued to move forward. The seasons changed, the trees that had once stood bare were now covered in fresh green leaves, and the streets that once carried memories of sadness now carried footsteps filled with peace. The person who had once trembled with fear while speaking from the heart had become someone who greeted each new morning with gratitude instead of regret. They no longer woke up asking, "What if?" Instead, they smiled and whispered, "Thank you for another chance to become a better person today." That simple change transformed everything. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. One evening, they returned to the same town square where their journey had taken its greatest turn. This time there was no crowd, no fear, and no heavy silence. Families laughed together, children chased each other across the open space, musicians filled the air with gentle melodies, and life moved beautifully around them. Standing there, they realized something that brought tears to their eyes. The place itself had never carried their pain. It had carried their courage. What once reminded them of fear had now become a reminder that one honest decision can change an entire life. As the golden light of sunset filled the sky, they noticed an elderly couple walking hand in hand. They weren't speaking very much. They simply smiled at each other with the quiet comfort that only years of patience, forgiveness, and understanding can create. Watching them, they understood that lasting love is not built on perfect moments. It is built through countless ordinary days where people continue choosing kindness, respect, honesty, and grace. That realization settled deeply into their heart. They finally understood that the greatest expression of love is not perfection, it is faithful compassion shown day after day. Don't skip this next part, because it is the heart of the entire story. Before leaving the square, they sat quietly on a nearby bench and opened the same journal that had carried every chapter of their journey. They slowly turned each page, remembering the tears that had fallen while writing those words. They smiled at the person they used to be, the one who believed fear would always control them, who believed regret would never leave, and who believed healing was impossible. Then they reached the final blank page. With steady hands and peaceful eyes, they wrote, "The greatest victory of my life was never changing someone else's heart. It was allowing my own heart to remain kind after disappointment, hopeful after uncertainty, and honest after fear. Stay until the very end, my beloved child, because this message belongs to you as much as it belongs to the story. Every person will face moments when life feels uncertain. Every heart will know seasons of waiting, disappointment, and longing. But those seasons are not the final chapter. They are the pages that teach patience, deepen compassion, and strengthen character. Never allow pain to convince you that kindness is weakness. Never allow disappointment to silence your ability to hope. The world always needs people who choose honesty over pride, forgiveness over bitterness, and love over fear." That night, under a sky filled with countless stars, they closed their eyes and whispered one final prayer. "Thank you for every lesson hidden inside my struggles. Thank you for teaching me that courage is stronger than fear, forgiveness is stronger than resentment, and hope is stronger than despair. Help me become someone whose life brings peace wherever I go." As those words faded into the quiet evening, an overwhelming calm settled over their heart. For the first time in many years, they felt completely free. Not because every dream had unfolded exactly as planned, but because they had discovered that true freedom begins the moment we stop letting fear decide who we become. And so the story comes to its beautiful ending. The person who once stood before a crowd with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes now walked confidently into the future with a peaceful smile. They carried no anger, no bitterness, and no chains from yesterday. Instead, they carried gratitude for every lesson, compassion for every person they met, and hope for every tomorrow still waiting to arrive. They had learned that love is never measured only by grand moments or dramatic confessions. Love is measured by the quiet choices we make every single day, to forgive when it is difficult, to speak truth with kindness, to encourage someone who feels alone, and to keep believing that goodness is always worth choosing. As the first light of a brand new morning appeared over the horizon, they took one final look at the path behind them and smiled. Every tear had become wisdom. Every disappointment had become strength. Every moment of waiting had become patience. Every act of courage had become peace. Without looking back again, they stepped into the sunrise with an open heart, ready to embrace every new chapter life would bring. And in that quiet, golden moment, they understood the greatest truth of all. The most beautiful ending is not finding a perfect life, it is becoming a person whose heart continues to shine with love, hope, and kindness, no matter what yesterday held. That light became their greatest gift to the world, and its warmth would continue touching lives long after this story came to an end.